Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Tuesday, February 4th. Derek Van Riper, Eno Saris here with you. It is position preview season finale. It is the reliever preview for 2025, the last in our long series of position previews. If you're watching us on YouTube, smash the like button or click it and tell everybody else you smashed it. That's probably the other way to go about it. Leave us a nice rating review on Apple Podcasts. Don't break your keyboard. I'm not liable for any broken keyboards out there. Drop us a nice review if you're listening on Spotify or any other place that lets you leave us a rating and review. And if you'd like to participate in our Hive Mind rankings for 2025, you can do that in our Discord. You can join our Discord with the link in the show description. Look for the Hive Mind rankings channel once you're inside and grab the form. Get the relievers ranked, get all the other positions ranked we've covered so far. We'll turn those rankings around here in a couple of weeks and share those to the listener rankings. So a lot of fun to see where everybody listening to this show is at on this group of players here as we enter the 2025 season. You know, these episodes have been a blast. They have been running long, so we will skip the pleasantries and go right into the first tier of relievers. And I made this a large tier because I think you have a main question that you have to answer when it comes to attacking saves as a category in a rotisserie league. You have to decide just what point in the draft are you comfortable drafting a closer? How early are you actually willing to go into this bucket? And it's a group that includes Emmanuel Clase, Devin Williams, Josh Hader, Mason Miller, Edwin Dìaz, Ryan Helsley, and Raisel Iglesias. And even within that group, I think people listening are saying, wait. There's at least one or two guys in that group that aren't quite like the others in terms of strikeout rate. They probably don't belong in the conversation. The reason they're all lumped together by ADP last 2 weeks, they're all inside the top 75 overall. So if you think about it in terms of a 15-team league, that's in the first 5 rounds that you're taking a closer. Are you comfortable paying that price to get anybody in that group at all, knowing that it costs you a high-end starting pitcher or a really well-established bat if you're going to go that route?
This is a very context-specific question because in a draft and hold, you have no free agency. You have to get all your saves from your draft day. And so I think you have to at least get the least acceptable first-tier reliever. You have to get one of those. It's just the price of entry. And so what you'll see is the best relievers get pushed up pretty hard in draft and hold. Now, if you're in a 10-team league with saves and holds, no. Like, I don't care. Like, I'll just get a couple mid-tier guys, because there's names that are not in this first tier that I like that I'm even taking in draft and holds as my first. So that's a little clue that there's somebody missing, I think, from this first tier by ADP. And then there's the answers in between. I just generally, what I don't want to be first. I'm not taking the first one. I just think that relievers are guys, their whole careers are a collection of small samples. If I gave you a starter that, threw 55 innings last year, and wanted you to tell me something about how good they'd be, we try and we do our best here, but would you feel as good as if you had 180 innings? No. So we have these guys who pop on the scene. We have our tools like Stuff Plus. We do our best to kind of divine how they'll do. And then sometimes even an Edwin Dìaz will just have a season where you're just like, what? You remember that season? What did he have? Like a 4.8 or something?
A couple extra homers can go a really long way when you're talking about 50, 60 innings in most cases. Yeah, the first season with the Mets after the famed Edwin Dìaz, Jared Kelenic blockbuster.
This is who we traded for?
A 5.59 ERA. I mean, easily the worst in his career. Yeah, it was absurd. He had a 2.33 homers per 9. He's never been close to that before. It was almost a full homer over his previous high. And in the years since then, I don't think he's come within like half of that mark, except for maybe this year was barely within half of that mark. That's how bad the home run rate was for Edwin Dìaz in 2019, his first season with the Mets. But the top end of this group, I mean, Emmanuel Clase's ADP in the last 2 weeks is pick 42. That's very, very early. I'm definitely not going that early, even in draft and holds for Clase. I'm out. And I'm saying this about someone that I think is really good. Even in a historical context, Emmanuel Clase is one of 3 relievers in the wild card era. So this goes back to 1995 with 250 or more innings pitched, a sub-2 ERA, and a sub-1 WHIP over their first 5 seasons combined. Can you guess the other 2? I know your day is going so well. I want to start you off with some trivia.
Good, because I'm so good at it. So the other 2 relievers that did what?
250 innings pitched, sub-2 ERA, sub-1 WHIP over their first 5 big league seasons.
Is it like
the recent guys?
Is it like Mo or Wagner? Or?
Not Mo, not Wagner.
Wow. Oh, okay.
All right, I'll give you the answers. Craig Kimbrell.
Oh.
And Jonathan Papelbon.
Wow, I might have guessed Kimbrell because I like him. And I don't think he'll get to the Hall of Fame, but I think he might get some votes and be on there for a little bit. You know, he's not. We always remember the end of a reliever's career.
Yeah, he had a Hall of Fame start to his career at the very least. And I think there will be arguments about that later for sure.
Yeah. One thing I want to point out about, just taking the last question you gave me about why wouldn't I, and then, putting Clase into it. Clase was worth $28 last year if you use a 15-team auction calculator, and $28 versus Tarek Skubal was the best starter at $48. If Clase was a starter, he would have been the 10th best starter, tied with Dylan Cease. And that's obviously worth buying, and that is the best closer. But then generally, there were 3 $20 closers, and there were 25 $20 starters. So just with that value proposition, that's why I tend to, fade them. Now, yes, would it be nice to know that I draft Emmanuel Clase this year and get, a $28 closer when everybody else is piddling around with $10 closers? Yes, that would be really great. The one problem is that Emmanuel Clase's workload has been pretty hefty. You're talking about 3 straight years of 70-plus innings, and that doesn't even count the postseason, which is another sort of 14 innings on top of that. So, that's some of the most workload that we've seen, in the last 3 years among relievers. What are we talking about here in terms of the most workload as a reliever? Emmanuel Clase, 219.2. Tyler Rogers, 220. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if you can even put them in the same category. And Tyler Rogers is throwing 83. Clase is throwing 103. Tanner Scott at 212. Brian Array at 210. So it's kind of rarefied air. In terms of health outcomes, Tanner Scott's been all right. Brian Abreu's been all right. Griffin Jacks is up there, has been all right. Chris Stratton has not been okay. Kyle Finnegan is up there. Scott Barlow, Brent Suter, some of these hybrid guys, I guess. But I guess you don't have to call for injury just because of the workload, but I would say that it is a pretty hefty workload combined with a really high velocity that makes me a little bit nervous about his health.
Yeah, I mean, the stuff is electric. We've seen that forever. The home run rate is tidy, and that's part of why Emmanuel Clase does what he does, because he's so hard to square up. He doesn't strike nearly as many guys out as you'd expect for someone who throws as hard as he does. It's kind of a jarring thing. Even the swinging strike rate seems a little high relative to the actual strikeout rate that he puts up. I think that's part of the problem I have with it. More so than the workload is that if I were going to take a closer this early, I want a 40% strikeout rate. I want the possibility of 100 strikeouts in 60 innings. And Clase has just shown us he's not that guy,
that's
even though he's been phenomenal.
Right. You're going to get 65 strikeouts, probably, maybe 70.
Right.
That's a big difference.
And 3 straight seasons with 40+ saves. Job security is A++++. So I understand why some people are doing it, but I am not on board for the reasons we outlined. Devin Williams heading to the Bronx for his walk year after a tough blown save in his final appearance as a Brewer. Another guy that doesn't really give up homers, gave one up at the worst possible time, but he still looks elite. I mean, coming off that back injury last year, I saw really the same guy. And Devin Williams has a 39.4% K rate for his career. That to me is a big difference. That comes with a high walk rate too, because there's points when the feel for the fastball or the airbender might not be there. Command might be a little wobbly, and guys just lay off and he issues walks. But look, he's had an 11.8% walk rate for his whole career, and he's got a sub-2 ERA and a near 1 whip and that big strikeout rate. Any concerns about the move into Yankee Stadium? Like, other than the ballpark being tougher, I don't know what's really different about Devin Williams as we approach 2025.
I mean, he's always had really minuscule home run rates, other than just your memory of him in the playoffs. I mean, that was like, I forget what the stat was, but they were like, oh, that's the first home run he's given up to a right-hander, and you're like, what? And how many years? I don't know what it was, but it was very surprising. And I love him in terms of on the field success, but if there was a Tyler Glasnow or Jacob deGrom of closing, I would have to give him that after topping out at 60 innings in the last 3 years and undergoing different arm maladies and back maladies. He might strike out 65 batters this year too in 40 innings. And there is one projection that sort of agrees with me. Zip says 44 innings, 30 saves, and how many strikeouts? 61. So, what would he be worth compared to Clase if he did that? A little bit less, might still be worth his price. But this is where I kind of go off the beaten path a little bit. This is a little bit of speculation, but I just think that the action on that pitch of his is unhealthy.
Do you think so? You're just worried about the airbender and long-term implications that throwing that pitch has on his arm.
Yeah, and I hate to wade into non-science. I always like to try to have scientific background for what I'm saying. What I have is anecdotal at best. It's Dallas Braden talking about how his screwball messed up his arm and his shoulder, and just to some extent, just watching him do it. Like, if you watch it in slow motion and stuff, I feel like I'm just like, yow. I don't know if people don't know what I'm talking about. Like, he throws a changeup, which, you normally kind of, if you're watching on YouTube, you kind of pronate on a changeup where you're kind of going down towards your index finger, right? And everyone pronates a little bit, so it's not unhealthy to pronate. But what he does is like a hyperpronation, like a super pronation. What he does is he kind of starts on the other side of the ball, and then this is what he's doing. Like, he's like really aggressively like pulling down on that side and throwing it like 88 miles an hour. So I don't know. Part of me just yelps every time I see it, and it's an amazing pitch, and I love it. But I do think it's tied in with his injury problems.
I would take Williams over Clase. I will not draft either of them at their current NFBC prices in most circumstances right now. A former Brewer sits right there behind them in Josh Hader. We've talked a lot about the uniqueness of Josh Hader's fastball on this show. It's something Trevor kind of pointed out in great detail. And Houston pushed that workload a little bit harder for Josh Hader in year one of that long-term deal. ERA crept up to 3.80. The whip was still down at 0.96. He was over 100 Ks. It's the fourth time in his career that Josh Hader has racked up 100 or more strikeouts in a season. 30-plus saves every full season, each of the last 5 full seasons. So it's kind of like the Clase consistency by role and usage with added Ks, another guy with a higher walk rate, but it comes in a much older package, right? We're talking about a guy that's going to be 31 in April, but I'm not really seeing much of a decline in Josh Hader's stuff. I think we're just seeing pretty typical variance for a guy that has regular closer command.
Yeah, he has a Edwin Dìaz season on his record too, a 5.22 ERA in 2022, and I think that was just poor command. There were some slipping mechanics, and he ironed that out eventually. I could see making Hader my number one. There's a case to be made, even in those sort of 10 and 12 leagues or saves league, you just want one of the best, the very best, And this is the first time that I might be tempted to kind of jump in and be like, yeah, I'll make this guy my champion. I know that he didn't strike a guy out in the postseason. He looked mortal. But again, that's tied a little bit to the regular season, and those innings don't count for most of us. So
you don't have to worry about playoff innings in most fantasy leagues. Yeah, exactly. Still averaging 96-1 though on that sinker. I wonder.
Yeah, I was looking at the velo, being like, did it drop? And not really.
I wonder if he'll eventually throw a changeup or something a little more often as he ages. Right, if he loses a tick on the fastball or 2 ticks over time, if a third pitch ends up being the wrinkle that Hader brings into the equation.
Yeah, and also like he benefits from deception in a way where he kind of throws what spins like a four seam, what spins like a sinker and acts like a four seam from a weird arm slot. And, you wonder if over time, the more you see that, can you get better at it? And there is some evidence that the batters get better at pitchers over the course of seeing them. The one thing you could say is though, like, Mo's pitch was pretty unique, and he just kept throwing it. So, but the difference is Mo had elite command.
He did.
Hader doesn't. And so Hader can't always put it where he needs to put it. And so I do think maybe a cutter or something, just something in between the fastball and slider so that people can't start to see him really well and figure him out.
Let's talk about Mason Miller for a couple of minutes. He goes up in this range too. And I was thinking about this just from who do I think is the best closer in baseball? If I could choose anyone to be my primary ninth inning option.
Knew he was going to give you, 70 innings or 65 innings.
Yeah, that's the part where you're like, oh, if I don't have that guarantee, is it still Mason Miller? I mean, look, there's an occupational hazard to averaging 101.1 on your fastball. That's the part that has me jittery. But even on an A's team that we thought was pretty gross on paper going into last season, he racked up 28 saves. Yep. That team's clearly getting better. And I think Miller does tick the box of, well, how many top-tier closers can strike out 100 guys in a season? He is absolutely on that list. Might even lead this entire group in Ks. And I was not surprised looking back at the Sierra leaderboard for this top tier from 2024. Mason Miller had a Sierra below 2. That'll happen when you have a 41.8% K rate, a pretty healthy 8.4% walk rate, and you really don't have a home run problem. 0.83 homers per 9 is absolutely fine. It really is a health question. Otherwise, if you could guarantee me that, Mason Miller is the first closer off the board for me 10 times out of 10 times if I'm going to go down that road.
Mason Miller has the best ERA projection if you include his stuff plus. His oopsie ERA, 2.21. Number 2 and number 3 are not in this tier. So that's the only reason, I might still hold out on this tier. There are 2 elite pitchers that are not in this tier. But Mason Miller is pretty exciting. I love him.
Yeah. And the reason we're focusing on these guys because sometimes they fall. Not everyone plays in the NFBC. There's also if you're playing in an auction setting, you have to decide. Are you going to spend 18, 20, 22, 24, 25 bucks, whatever it usually spends to get one of these guys? I tend to be comfortable allocating budget that way toward a top closer more than a third or fourth round draft pick in the current landscape.
Yeah. And I think this is why. I think you're right. And we don't do enough auction strategy. But one thing that I did in labor early on was I was always like, well, my values don't spit anything out like what they do in the room on closers. So I was always like, I'll just get some guys, and it didn't really work that well. I would pay like $10 for the 21st best closer, and you're just like, yay, maybe it'll be okay. And what I realized after a while was, oh, the best guys in the auction room don't get separated by much.
Mm-mm. No, they get lumped together.
There's like almost like this $18 level. That was AL labor. I don't want to say that's true for all of yours, but you'll see it. And maybe you can go back in your last year's results if you want to in your auction. You'll see, oh, wait. So the 5th best guy was 18, and the 4th best guy was 19, and the 3rd best guy was 19, and the 2nd best guy was 20, and the 1st best guy was 21. Wait, so I only have to pay $3 more to get the best closer?
Yeah.
There's like tax.
Yeah. The dollars to draft pick value just don't translate perfectly in the relief pool. That's the way I see it. They do seem, in most of the auctions I've been in, they are tightly packed together the way you described. There are a couple leagues I played in where the top end will get up to like even $28 or $30. Those are deeper mixed leagues, 15, 16 team mixed leagues sometimes. And that's a harder decision to make then, because you realize in that case, the end game is going to be really nice. If closers are getting bumped up that high above projected values, because the projections will spit out 24, 25 at the most.
Extra dollar to pick a $2 to bid $2 and somebody else's $1 a couple of times could actually be worth a lot.
Right, because I've also noticed in those same leagues, spending at every top end part of every position is like that.
Goes nuts. Yeah,
it's not just the closers, so you have to kind of read it relative to what else is happening.
So you could get a $35 guy also later for $30 because people are starting to run out of money.
Yeah, you can do really well.
You could actually port this over to Snake strategy and say, why doesn't that follow in Snake? If there's just a tax to buy the best reliever, then why not just buy the best reliever? And I would just answer, I just want to pay the least tax. So in the example of 18 to 21, I'm not buying the 21. I'm buying the 18 or 19 because I'm paying the least tax and still getting one of the top four. And that's my theory here too, is I can save in auction, I can save those $3 for the end game and still get one of the best closers. And in Snake, I can wait 3 rounds, and that can be 3 players. That can be worth even more than an auction to wait.
Let's look at the last 3 in this tier for a moment. Edwin Dìaz, and coming off the torn ACL, a 3.52 ERA, a 104 WHIP, 84 Ks, and 53 2/3 innings. Only 20 saves. Kind of a surprise there. I don't see any threats to his job. He's still in the midst of a 5-year, $102 million contract.
Kind of a big downturn in velo, though.
Yeah, so that's the part that I was going to ask you about. Is he lost about a tick and a half on the fastball? He went from 99.1 pre-knee injury to 97.6. That's still a lot. I think what it is the maximum peak ceilings, the 44 and 45% K rates we saw from Dìaz.
50% in 2022. 50%. He struck out 50%.
Yeah.
Guys, it's
so we're probably not getting back to that level again. But guess what? If you're still averaging 97.6 on your fastball, you could still probably run a 33 or a 35% K rate, and that holds up fine in this group. So he's going to lag behind Mason Miller and Devin Williams maybe, but that's about it. And then the job security being where it is, the health being kind of a fluky injury that, wasn't shoulder, wasn't elbow.
Give him a better health grade than Williams, I think. And
I mean, I'm more worried about Devin Williams having a setback with his back, given the nature of that injury, than I am Edwin Dìaz having problems with a surgically repaired ACL on his knee.
I don't think. Yeah, I think so. I agree. Also, 5th best oopsie ERA, PP ERA, whatever you want to call it. So still elite by that measure. I'm in. If this is if I waited around and got Edwin Dìaz, I'm in.
ADP, just for context, about pick 60, right after Mason Miller. If they're right next to each other and you say you have to take a closer, otherwise you can't play. Okay, I'll take Mason Miller if those are the rules. Weird league. Don't want to play in a league quite like that. Ryan Helsley gets lumped in right here too, though. This is where I think there's a little bit of a gap. I think Helsley should be a tick behind the rest. He's already 30, which is surprising because he broke it a little late. He's a free agent after the season. The main thing that I'm worried about is if the Cardinals don't hang around in the NL Central or the NL wildcard race, as a pending free agent, Helsley could get traded and pretty easily not close somewhere else. Not because he's not good, but because teams that are contending usually have someone, multiple someones that are really good in the back end of the game. So compared to the other guys in this group, you may be getting 2/3 of a season's worth of saves, just because I think he's a little bit unique in that he could be the most likely to get moved and lose his job of this entire group.
Yeah, he still has a top 15 projection. His 12th best ERA projection. I kind of disagree a little bit. I think he would close almost anywhere he was traded. I mean, he's elite unless he got traded to the Mets, I guess, or somebody else on our list ahead of him. But one thing that was weird was for a while he wasn't doing back-to-backs. I believe that might have been 2023. Last year he did 1, 2, 3, didn't do many. 4, 5. So we're talking about a handful of back-to-backs over the course of the season. So he's, when you look up and you say, oh, he had 66 innings, that's fine. That's volume. But that could be your case for co-closers if he ends up somewhere else. Like he's just not going to be available on back-to-backs. And we're trying to preserve him for the postseason or whatever.
The other kind of lingering concern I have with Helsley is the nature of his injuries. I got the Baseball Forecaster 5-year injury log. Ryan Helsley. COVID in 2020. Okay, fine. Not really worried about that today. Stress reaction in his right elbow. That was 2021.
Yeah.
And a strained right forearm cost him a lot of time in 2023. So
no, don't like the forearms.
It's a lower health grade and the trade risk. Skills still look pretty good. Another guy that you would think would run mid-30s K rates, 29.7 is not bad, but a 17.3% swing strike rate last year.
99.8. So
where were the strikeouts relative to the group too? So I'm picking nits because that's what we do in this range.
I like him better than the next one.
Okay, so you like him better than Raisel Iglesias. You've been fading Raisel Iglesias for at least 2 years?
Someday I'll be right.
Seemingly A-plus job security on a very good team. There's a skills lag for this group. Absolutely. It's strikeouts. Here's another fun age-related tidbit. I thought Ryan Helsley was old at 30. Raisel Iglesias is 35 years old now.
I mean, the most amazing thing is I pulled up his velocity chart to be like, oh yeah, he'll have dropped in velocity, and he hasn't.
No.
I mean, it's from his peak velocity, it was 96.5 in 2017. To go from 2017 at 96.5 to 2024 at 95.7 is pretty impressive, actually.
Yeah.
So he's been keeping his velo, but he hasn't been keeping the strikeout rate. The swing strike rate's been all right. It's come down off of a peak with that full year in Anaheim. But yeah, so the last 4 years, Anaheim, 37.7% K rate. The next year, 2022, 31.7. 2023 in Atlanta, 29.4% strikeout rate for Raisel Iglesias. And then last year, 26.3. And Oopsie says it's going to stay there. Some of the other guys say there's going to be some bounce back. But the bat says it's going to go even further to 24.7% strikeout rate for Raisel Iglesias with a 3.66 ERA. So doesn't stand out in terms of ERA projection or strikeout projection. He's lost some of his competitors. I mean, I thought Minter was the guy that was going to steal the job from him at some point. You're paying for safety, and I feel like sometimes safety is perceived and not actual.
I think these are closer 2 skills at a closer 1 sort of price, and there's a bunch of guys that go in the second tier that are more intriguing. Yeah, these are the guys Eno's going to want. I was just remembering too with Raisel Iglesias. Quick trip down memory lane, very quick. He signed a 4-year deal with the Angels. The Angels traded for him before his walk year. Had him, gave him the qualifying offer. He declined the qualifying offer. They signed him to a 4-year deal in December. They traded him in the first year of a 4-year extension to Atlanta and got Tucker Davidson and Jesse Chavez back. What was that sequence?
Chavez, dude, I love that guy.
How did that happen?
You have to pry the ball from Jesse Chavez's dead fingers.
I just need to ask.
He's going to be pitching in Mexico at 48.
Yeah, Jesse Chavez will pitch forever. That is for sure. I just want to know. Could someone ask Artie Moreno, so what happened there? Why'd you give him a 4-year deal and then decide to have your GM trade him away and get Tucker Davidson and Jesse Chavez back? Because that's not very smart. Let's go to ADP tier number 2. We're looking at pick 75 down to pick 125. The reason we stretch this out is because there's a big cliff after pick 125. This group includes Félix Bautista, Andrés Muñoz, Jhoan Duran, Robert Suarez, and Ryan Walker. This is a really nice group in terms of overall skills. It starts off real strong, kind of fades a little bit in the end in terms of at least some questions creeping in. Bautista is expected ready for opening day, Might be eased into spring training. I don't worry about that with relievers. They only need a handful of appearances in games before they're ready. He's been throwing since August. So I think we're looking at a pretty full workload, maybe occasional early season, let's avoid a back-to-back or something approaches for him. But Is there anything that you're worried about with Félix Bautista, especially at this price? Because I think these are closer one skills, at least they were pre-TJ, and now you're kind of creeping closer to the back of the top 10 at this position by ADP.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only risk is the risk of revision. The risk of it not having held for him, and we just didn't see him pitch on the big league field, so we don't know what his velo's like. And to some extent, there's kind of weirdish mechanics there. He has this crazy high release point and crazy high ride from it, and throws 100. So I guess there could be some injury risk there. I think there's a heightened injury risk among all relievers too, because not only do they throw hard, but a lot of times they have poor command or weird mechanics, and that's why they ended up relievers. And so him coming back off of injury, I think there's a fair amount of risk there. But I'm going to turn the tables on you, even though I didn't answer your trivia at all. You're a little better at this than I am. I don't know if you've been staring a hole into these things, but the top 5 relievers projected by Oopsie in terms of ERA. You already got Mason Miller.
Mm-hmm.
And you already have Edwin Dìaz.
Mm-hmm.
I've already said that on this show. And Clase. So you got 3. Who are the other 2?
That's 3 out of 5. Is Andres Muñoz in there?
Yes, he is. He's number 2.
Yeah, I figured he could be in there since he's in this tier. Is the 5th guy not in this tier?
No, 5th guy's in this tier.
Oh, okay. Well, then I'll say it's Jhoan Duran.
It is.
Yeah, the next 2,
my favorite. And Duran's not coming off of TJ and has excellent strikeout rates and excellent stuff. And so Duran and Muñoz, you can take 2 guys that are really exciting, and I think better relievers than Raisel, Iglesias. And I think people. This is again the perceived safety idea. It's like. I think they saw some stuff in Seattle where sometimes some other guy would get a save, and maybe Griffin Jacks will get 5 saves this year. I don't care. I think Duran and Muñoz are the closers, and they're healthy. Bautista, by the way, is 6, so he's not far off. I'm just saying, if I could get somebody in the top 5 who is not coming off of surgery, I will. And those right there are the 2 that I have circled, that I have taken in most of my drafts, because I don't know why they're here, and I think they're elite, and they cost less.
Yeah, I
do think there is a drop from them. Like if I drew the tier line, you might put all these guys in tier 1 and draw the line after Duran, because there is a little difference after them, I think.
Yeah, and you could even probably take Iglesias and pull him down to this group and rearrange these a little bit accordingly. I do think with Andres Muñoz, I noticed that he made 60 appearances last year. 11 were multi-inning appearances, and 16 were games in which he entered with runners on base already. And those numbers looked a little high, and I compared it to Duran, who I think people have looked at the same way and wondered, is he like a regular, just 3 outs at the end of the game, like clear traditional 9th inning closer, or do they move him around a little bit? Part of the issue with Jhoan Duran last year was that he had an oblique injury to begin the season. So he actually had a path to 30 saves. 3 out of his 58 appearances were multiple innings, so much less usage in that multi-inning role. Again, Muñoz had 11 out of 60 appearances.
Muñoz is throwing a new sinker last year, so maybe they just really liked, his ability to get soft contact.
Yeah, and 7 out of 58 appearances were situations into which Duran entered with runners on base. So I think of the 2, I'm actually more comfortable with Duran just based on the who do I think will get more saves? Team quality is pretty similar, I would say. Twins, Mariners, like because of the AL Central being the way it is, sure, they could try to win the division again. They just are doing so little with their roster. It's perplexing. But I think these are both good closers to target. If we're saying who's in our circle of trust, and if we want to get one, I think they're both in. And I think you can justify flipping the order and saying, I prefer Duran or Muñoz to Bautista, but I do prefer Bautista to the rest of this tier, despite coming off the injury, because we've seen Bautista pitch like a guy that can be as good as a Williams or Hader. He can get to that level. So I'm right there with you as far as these two guys, Muñoz and Duran, being a little undervalued relative to the pack. It's probably almost entirely because of Raisel Iglesias being sandwiched where he is. If Iglesias went like 20 picks later and was behind these guys, I'd be nodding along a little bit more to the actual order of how things are working by ADP. But I think
I don't want to, like, my fading Iglesias is not usually just like, oh, he's going to be terrible. It's more just like, I don't think he's as good as the other guys. And to the point about Muñoz, yes, it's possible that he only gets the 25 saves this year and that the guys around him get more saves. I think he'll make up for that with, this second best ERA type skills. But I do have to sort of nod along and say, yes, Seattle has more options. So just looking at the top 30 in projected ERA, Seattle has 4 guys. Muñoz, Brash, Santos. 3 guys? They have 3 guys. Minnesota only has 2. And Edward Bizardo is 32nd. So if you do top 40, Seattle has 4 guys. And so I do think that they have options. This is also, they use Stuff Plus. Very obviously. You can kind of see it when you look at their relievers. Like, oh, okay. Yeah. 4 top 40 guys projected by Oopsie. Yep. That makes sense.
The 2 in this group that feel like they're overdrafts just in a broader sense, I think, are Robert Suarez and Ryan Walker. Suarez, for me, like, the velocity ticked up last year and it didn't come with more strikeouts. The good news was we saw the lowest walk rate during his time in the big leagues, 6.2%. The weird thing is the projections don't like him. The bat has a 4.19 ERA for Robert Suarez.
That's right.
One thing that I'm looking at too is he actually allows a lot of hard contact. And guys that throw hard are going to do that most of the time.
Predictable. He's almost a one-pitch pitcher, especially if he gets behind the count. He's got one pitch he likes.
Yeah, so a 40.4% hard hit rate kind of stands out as problematic when you're not running 30+% strikeout rates. You have to miss more bats to live to tell the tale when you give up that much hard contact. And the other factor here is we know the Padres are squeezed cash-wise, right? So we're going to get to a point later in the show. There's a half dozen teams that don't have any clear-cut closer right now, or at least they don't have a reliever being drafted in the top 250 overall. Suarez could be on the move. They could trade him. He has an opt-out after 2025, but he's going to turn 34 in March. And even if he does the same thing he just did, I don't know if the free agent market at his age is going to be kinder than what's left on that deal in 26 and 27 at like $9 million per on average, right? So I can see the Padres looking at Suarez, looking at who they have depth-wise in their bullpen and saying, let's move Suarez for somebody who's either pre-arb or year 1 arbitration, save money that way, backfill at closer with someone else, and we're just going to move on. Like, that's a possibility.
Estrada and Adam are projected to be top 40 relievers by PPERA, and Suarez isn't.
It's a strength in that organization. So I guess the same thing I was thinking about with Helsley would be true with Suarez. Like, would there be teams interested at $9 million per in acquiring Suarez and making him a 7th or an 8th inning guy? Like, I don't think he's a lock to close. If he
might
goes
be a really good
else.
one. I mean, if he can focus on using that sinker and maybe throwing it low in the zone instead of high in the zone, trying to chase strikeouts and become more of like a Muñoz type, where he's trying to get ground balls and throwing low in the zone. At least it would be something different than what he's been doing. And they could maybe put him in situations where he doesn't face a lot of lefties, because that's when you see him, do predictable things, try to throw his sinker high and away, and see people take him a yard the other way. So that's a risk for me, for sure.
Last night I was bugging you on the group chat. I said, hey, what do you guys think about Robert Suarez to the Tigers for Casey Mize? And Casey Mize has 2 more years before free agency. So arbitration's like, I don't know, $2.3 million or something for this year. So they'd save money. Padres would get a starter. Tigers would get a closer. Mize's role is kind of up in the air right now in Detroit anyway. Maybe the change of scenery would work wonders for both. It's the best I could do.
I mean, they're looking for starters because the back end right now is Waldron, Brito, and Randy Vasquez.
Right.
So, I mean, what we've been hearing is Cease, and if it's Cease, then it's going to be kind of, one of those deals like the Soto deal where I think it's Cease for like 2 starters that he can plug into his rotation right away. And maybe a outfield prospect, because they kind of have a problem in left field too.
All right.
So, Mize might fit, and maybe it's like Mallow and Mize. I don't know. I don't know where Justin Henry Malloy is right now on their depth chart. He seems like a versus lefties only guy all of a sudden.
That's the way they've been using him, and the glove continues to be the problem. Going back to this tier to close it out, Ryan Walker took over that job in San Francisco, and I think as you look at the depth chart, Camilo Doval still looks like the biggest threat to take it, and Doval's the guy that lost the job to Walker in the first place. So aside from the lack of a track record of this sort of dominance in the big leagues from Ryan Walker prior to last season, it is lower end velocity for a closer. It's like 94.2 on the 4-seamer, 95.6 on the sinker. It's actually tied with Raisel Iglesias for the slowest fastball on the episode so far. So it's not prototypical closer stuff. His slider is really good, but I noticed he gives up a lot of homers on it. And I wonder if it's because guys took up their sitting slider against him and take him deep because they could just try to get lucky on there. I don't know. I don't really understand how Ryan Walker was as good as he was last year. 32% K rate, sub 6% walk rate. There's a lot to like on the surface. It's a nice ballpark that helps him keep the home run rate down overall. But I was surprised at just how susceptible the slider was to giving up homers.
Yeah, that's so weird too, because the slider is the one that has the stuff plus 125. And the sinker has a 94 stuff plus despite its velo. So they're somehow sitting on the better pitch by the model. I think generally what I think of when I see him is Jake Arrieta. I don't know what that means. I mean, Jake Arrieta as a reliever would be pretty good, I think.
Yeah, that would be pretty good. So are you in on Walker? Let's just say, a run happens. You're waiting for one of Muñoz, Duran, Bautista. You were 6 picks away. Those 3 guys all go, and you're like, crap, I got to make a move now because there's a bad drop after this tier. Are you comfortable with Walker, or are you saying
not really? Because I think Doval represents a serious threat to his candidacy. Because one of the things that was missing maybe with Doval was to some extent, and this is just you can read the transaction history, must have been something to do with attitude. Because you don't send a guy like that down who's still throwing 100. Like there's nothing wrong with him physically. You send him down. Why'd you send him down? Because he's not willing to work on something that you wanted to work on in the major leagues. So I think that's a bit of a wake up call. And why do I think, so when you look at the movement and the extension, he was lost an extension. He lost some movement last year. If you look at that and you look at the charts when he came back, he didn't fix it right away. But they, A, brought him back, and B, he volunteered to pitch this winter. So I think that must be a pretty big wake-up call, because as a reliever, your life in the game is tenuous. And when you're a closer and you're coming out and all the lights are on, you feel like maybe, nah, I'm good, and then you're back in AAA the same year that you had the lights on for yourself, That's got to be a huge wake-up call. So I know these are, again, I'm wading into the kind of soft skill stuff, but what I'm doing is pairing this soft analysis along with the fact that Walker has less stuff, a higher ERA projection from PPERA than Doval, and one of the lesser stuff packages of these closes that we talked about so far.
All right. Well, I'm with you on Doval still being a bit of a threat, and I think it's an easy bullpen to just avoid completely if you don't want to wait it out and see how it plays out, because Walker might be good enough to make you wait 2 or 3 months, and then Doval ends up being a cut, and you're going to spend the fab trying to get him later anyway if the job even changes hands at all.
I've gotten Doval in the draft and hold I'm doing right now.
Yeah,
like the 33rd round or something. It was okay.
At that point, sure, no problems there. ADP tier 3 is changing pretty quickly. We talked about the Royals making that big addition with Carlos Estévez. This group used to be started by Lucas Erceg, Trevor Megill, Jeff Hoffman, Kirby, Yates, Tanner Scott, Alexis, Dìaz, David Bednar, Ben Joyce, and Pete Fairbanks all lumped in here in the span of about 4 to 5 rounds. Erceg's ADP is going to change because I think we're getting some indications from the Royals that Carlos Estévez will definitely be a part of the mix for saves. As we talked about previously, I think Estévez is good enough to just keep the job, even though Erceg is the better of the two relievers all around. Like if I just needed 3 outs and my season was hanging in the balance, I would choose Erceg. But it's close enough where I don't think you want to wait it out with Erceg, because it could be one of those situations that Estévez just doesn't wobble enough to ever lose the job. And you could be holding a really good setup guy all season. And in some leagues, really good setup guys don't have that much value.
Yeah, dude, I don't like this tier at all. Like almost the whole tier. I don't think I'm really taking part in this tier. I will point out the names that when we get to them, but I like Erceg as a pitcher, but you're right. It's a 10-point difference in Stuff Plus and New Stuff Plus between him and Estévez. 112 for Erceg and 102 for Estévez. But just the way that Estévez is brought in on free agency, the money he's being paid, I just kind of feel like he's going to be anointed the closer. And if he doesn't screw up, then Erceg doesn't get the chance to take it from him.
Got to give the Royals some credit, though, for making that bullpen a lot better. There's good depth there. That A bullpen is solid, and it might even be 4 or 5 deep in terms of guys you don't want to see once they hash out who their number 5 starter is going to be, because Chris Bubich could be back in the pen again, and he looked really good in that role a year ago. They added Hunter Harvey, who was hurt after the trade, and Erceg was part of the deadline last year, and Estévez, and
Estévez, like, versus the rest of the prices that were out there, like I think he was a decent value.
Yeah, I'm looking just at the last 3
Scott
days
for like 70+ million.
Yeah, it's not a bad contract in free agency. The last handful of days, just 3 days worth of drafts, the earliest Estévez has gone is pick 154, so he's starting to creep up into this tier, which makes sense. But this is a weird place to shop for the most part. Trevor Megill looked like a very
so many
capable
questions
replacement
on all these guys. Megill is, I think, one of the guys I might take in this tier. I mean, I don't. The only question is, I guess, health. He had a health problem last year, right?
Yeah, and Megill, at one point, Megill suffered a concussion. It's because he fell.
Like walking along.
Yeah, he was at the store. He was getting like a new modem or something at the mall, and it was like the Time Warner store at the mall, or Charter store at the mall, whatever the stupid thing's called. But he's a big dude.
Laugh out of it. I take back the laughing. It's just like
I think he fainted and hit his head, and that's bad for anyone. He's 6'8", the long fall. The other injury was a back injury too.
Problem with fainting, he probably underwent a whole battery of heart tests and stuff.
Yeah,
I had that issue for a little bit, and I don't know what they found in the end.
Yeah, scary stuff.
We don't get access to that. So I guess there's some stuff there where you feel like it's a little bit of black box in terms of his health.
I think he's got good enough stuff to be a top 10 closer. I think the Brewers are.
What do you think of the threats to him? I mean,
that's the problem.
But Abner Uribe has no command.
No, none. No
Payamps
fastball
is not
command.
a closer.
Payamps is not much of a threat.
Yeah.
No, it's going to be someone you don't expect, right? It's going to be, it could be someone you expect. I think there are questions about.
Wait, there's a guy on our list later.
Aaron Ashby, his role, he was great out of the bullpen last year. He could do it. They've shown in the past they'll use lefties to close, and they've got 3 other lefties in the bullpen, maybe more, depending on how the final roster shakes out. So it's not we need a lefty earlier in the game. So
and
theoretically,
he has no command, and he's had trouble staying healthy. So maybe the bullpen is right for him.
You could do that with DL Hall. You could bring up Jacob Mizorowski and use him as a closer. So I think there are a lot of unknowns here.
The Yoho.
Craig Yoho?
Dude, Craig Yoho has a 3 PPERA. What? Tell me about him. I don't know anything about him. Do you know anything about him? Who's Craig Yoho?
It's weird. It's a low velo fastball with a nasty changeup. So
really,
I
that's
don't
not a closer.
I don't think that's a closer. I think that's a good weapon somewhere in the bridge tier closer. And yeah, projections love him because he's been great in the minors. Like
This must be some sort of weird oopsie thing where he has different MLEs or something, major league equivalencies.
Yeah, I think he's going to be a very good big league reliever, but I don't think Craig Yoho
Yeah, I don't think
is the closer.
I've taken some really late Abner Uribes because he does have nasty stuff, and sometimes command doesn't matter that much as a closer.
Well, and what if, to whatever extent it matters, like when last season started and Williams was hurt, Uribe was the first guy that got the shot. So whether he can wrestle it back quickly or not, like that's an open question. All of this is to say, like, of the group, Megill is okay where he's going. I think if you're looking for that second closer, he fits better there as your first. There's a couple guys that go after him right now that I like a little more. Jeff Hoffman, I think, is a little safer because of the contract. It's a multi-year role now where he's been phenomenal out of the bullpen. So I think as far as guys that are probably moving up in ADP
scare that like scared a lot of other people away from signing him to that contract. But you know what? There was a lot of like, oh, can he start? And so maybe people were like, well, with this kind of health, I don't think he can be a starter. Where the Blue Jays were like, yeah, but we just need a reliever. So like, he probably has the same health risk as other relievers. So yeah,
right.
Throw him in there.
I'd probably put Hoffman up above Robert Suarez if I was kind of pushing him up into the bottom of the next tier. I think that's a reasonable way to go about it. I think I like Tanner Scott more than most people do right now too, but Brandon Gomes, the GM, already came out and said he's going to get a decent share of the saves. Like if the Dodgers generate 50 saves this year, Tanner Scott should get 35 of them? Like, is that a reasonable, like 70% of the save opportunities for the Dodgers? Like we talked about it before and said maybe if teams they expect to see a lot, they'll mix and match some, but come playoff time, they're just trying to, avoid someone getting too many looks at Tanner Scott. Other than that, like, what are we worried about?
Lewis created the most save opportunities last year.
Well, yeah, that's 55. Always strange, right?
Close games, but then it was Cleveland 53, Milwaukee 53, Tampa 51, Dodgers 50. Yeah. If he's got 50, he can get to 30, and there'd still be 5 for Kirby Yates and 5 for Evan Phillips, and yeah.
Maybe I'm a big dum-dum, but I'm taking Tanner Scott probably first of this entire group so far.
Not great command for Scott, but it really, like I said, once you get to a certain level and it's relief, like you can do this sort of thing that Trevor May talked about where you can be like, I'm just going to give you this free pass because I'm going to strike the next guy out. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. He's pretty dominant. I think there's also enough, really kind of scary left-handers around the league that, if you were going to face, Juan Soto, Francisco Lindor and somebody like, I think you would bring Scott out, and it would almost be just for Soto, right? You know what I mean? But you can't do that anymore. So you just be like, yeah, Scott's gonna be our closer tonight because Soto's coming up in the ninth.
I think he's the primary source of saves for the Dodgers, and people are underdrafting him right now. Alexis Dìaz looks vulnerable every single draft season, and yet there he is, still keeping the job. I almost think Taylor Rogers is more of a threat to Dìaz than some of the other recent bullpens the Reds have put together behind him. But Rogers has had home run trouble at various points in the last couple of years, so I don't know if the Park's a good fit.
He's got the 445th best PPERA projection.
445th?
Yeah.
It's a lot of guys projected that probably aren't pitching in the big leagues in there, right?
And I don't know how much we can argue. Like last year, he had a 3.99 ERA with a 130 WHIP and a 22% strikeout rate. Like he was, I kind of want to look up what he was worth last year. Was he worth a lot? He was among relievers. Oh, geez, I can't even find him.
It's not great.
Where is he?
28 saves with below average ratios for a closer and a low strikeout rate.
77th reliever by the auction calculator.
I kind of believe it.
I mean, I think he's in a void.
He's probably in a void. The case for him would be lack of
saves.
great alternatives, saves, and maybe if you were just building a ratios machine, elite staff of starters, you're like, I don't need the extra Ks from my reliever, and I can take a little bit of a risk in ERA and WHIP over 55, 60 innings, and it won't wreck me. Maybe that's the way to think about him, but I don't know. I don't really like Alexis Dìaz all that much, so easily a guy that I'll look elsewhere at when we're kind of in this part of the queue, especially with David Bednar sitting right there next to him. Like the tipping problems were well documented. Aroldis Chapman's gone.
Falling. I mean, what do you have on the max and min, and like maybe an idea of some of the who'd you rather's for Bednar? Because I've found him enticing in some drafts.
143 to 283 in the last 3 days is the spread, but right around pick 200.
Will fall in some of your drafts.
I don't quite understand. I don't understand why you would take Alexis Dìaz over David Bednar at the very least. That seems like a no-brainer for Bednar.
Bednar has a better projection for almost every system. 370 from Oopsie. Bednar throws 97. Dìaz throws 94. Bednar throws in Pittsburgh. Dìaz throws in Cincinnati.
Yeah. I just think he's one of my favorite players in a tier where I don't love everyone. So definitely like the price on Bednar right now. Hope it stays cheap. What do you think about Ben Joyce? The walk rate came down a little bit last year. Still not striking out as many guys you'd expect for someone who averages 102.4 with his fastball. But hey, I'm getting Jordan Hicks vibes here.
Yeah. And Jordan Hicks was a good closer. So I think Ben Joyce is unquestionably the closer. They want to install him and get him for 5 years. I don't think he will be one of the highest strikeout rate guys, but Oopsie says 28%. He had 30% numbers in the minors. There could be kind of an arsenal tweak there for him. Or he could be a guy who only strikes out, quote unquote, 24, 25% of guys, but keeps the ERA really low because he's not going to give up any homers. Not throwing a 102-mile-an-hour sinker. Yeah, and I think Hicks is actually a pretty good example there. But 59% ground ball rate for Ben Joyce last year, 0.26 home runs per 9. And you see with Oopsie, the lowest BABIP projection because of his stuff, in a 3.10 ERA. Ben Joyce has been on teams of mine. I'm already acquiring shares of him. Ben Joyce and David Bednar are guys that I can circle in this tier. And I think if I circle Megill, Bednar, and Joyce, I can probably wait past pick 200 and get one of them.
Would you consider building a team where you just bail on those top 2 tiers and shoot for a combination of these guys in the middle rounds? Do you feel like you'll get enough?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, which each of them you have these caveats where you're just like, I don't know if Ben Joyce is going to strike guys out. Bednar he was great for 3 straight seasons before this last season, but he did lose something and he has to get something back. And then Megill has those health risks. I mean, maybe if you get 2 out of these 3, you end up with one guy who ends up top 5 at the end of the season. That wouldn't be crazy at all, right? Like Bednar just returns to form, or Megill just announces himself with authority, or Ben Joyce does strike out 28 to 29% of the guys with 30 plus saves. So if you take 2 out of 3, you might get one elite guy. It could be a way to cheap your way into an elite guy.
Pete Fairbanks is the last of this tier. Since he debuted in the big leagues in 2019, he has never reached 50 innings in a big league season. Last year, swinging strike rate bottomed out at 9.5%. Strikeout rate came down along with it. I'm worried. This is a loaded pen. They always find guys that are good. They make a lot of adjustments. It's an affordable contract.
Mason Montgomery, Hunter Biggie. They got guys.
Edwin Uceta was good at the end of last year. I mean, they never seem to have a problem. Fairbanks is scheduled to make $4 million this year with a club option for 2026. So in real life, he could be a closer for someone else or a nice addition to some other bullpen. I just don't think he's the guy in Tampa Bay when the season ends, be that because of injury, further skills loss, or a trade. A lot of ways this one can go wrong, even though the price is not bad.
I mean, if you have health grades on relievers, his has to be one of the worst.
Yeah, absolutely has to be, which is a bummer. I'd love to see healthier seasons from Pete Fairbanks, but it just looks like the stuff is starting to erode pretty quickly for him. Let's get to the next group. Pick 200 to pick 250 range. Only a few names in this group right now. Jordan Romano, Justin Martinez, Carlos Estévez, We already talked about him. He's kind of moving up anyway. Kenley Jansen, who would move up if he were to sign, and Ryan Presley, another guy that's probably going to creep up closer to that David Bednar territory within the top 200.
If you had to pick one, who are you picking?
Out of these 5?
I'm going to guess Estévez.
Probably Estévez, but I'm assuming the price is changing. So then let's take him out and say who's the next pick. Presley, I think. I'm worried about Romano from a health perspective. I don't.
Yeah, the team that had him and looked at his rehab and saw his like medical stuff and like saw him up front said no thanks.
Yeah,
to like save like a few $1 million.
That's the order of this just not being quite right for me. And I think the Phillies, they have some quality alternatives too, right? Like they don't have to use Jordan Romano as a closer. They signed him on a pretty affordable 1-year deal.
Yeah,
look at this,
baby. This is the best PPERA projections with 10 or fewer saves. And it starts with Griffin Jackson, Kate Smith, which but Orion Kerkering is fire personified. I mean, I just love that guy. Matt Brash is hurt. Craig Yoho, we talked about, maybe a little artifact of the projection system. But Jeremiah Estrada is great. Camilo Doval is on here. Dead Neil Nunez is your Edwin Dìaz handcuff, probably. Gregory Santos, Eduard Bizardo, your Seattle guys, along with Brash. Evan Phillips, a 3.14. I would give him 5 to 7 saves if you're in deeper leagues and want to just gather a couple saves for real cheap. Brian Abreu is your forever handcuff in Houston. And then Jose Alvarado, a 3.15 ERA projection. These are all better than the Jose Alvarado, and the Ryan Kerkering numbers are better than the Jordan Romano projections. So they've got 2 guys in the pen, a lefty and a righty, who are projected to be better than the guy that people think is the closer.
Yeah.
With Jimmy Garcia, who, I think people think it's Chad Green who's the biggest threat to Hoffman, and I think it's actually Jimmy Garcia.
I think Hoffman is the only threat to Hoffman. It's just if that stuff they were seeing in the physicals before he signed with the Jays, if that's really a problem, that's it. It's just a health thing. So I'm not stashing from the Blue Jays pen in mixed leagues. Maybe in an AL only league in reserves, I would take that flyer, but probably not doing it on my roster in a mixed league to begin the season. In Arizona, are you in on Justin Martinez?
I am.
Okay, so what gives you confidence that it's Martinez and not AJ Puck? Because AJ Puck as a reliever is phenomenal. He's I don't know, maybe a top 10 reliever league wide. Am I just out of my mind right now with this sort of ceiling on Puck?
I think the thing that gives me confidence is that Joe Mantiply's fastball is 89 miles an hour. And that seems like maybe a weird thing to bring up right now because Joe Mantiply is not a threat to be closer, but Joe Mantiply is the other lefty in this bullpen. And I think you're going to get a true co-closer situation with Justin Martinez and AJ Puck, righty-lefty. And I think that Puck is sometimes going to be used for lefties in the 8th. And there are more righties in the game than lefties. So Justin Martinez, I think they may end up both with 15 to 20 saves.
Okay. Yeah, it could be a split. I've looked at that one a few times by ADP and thought, give me AJ Puck, because I feel like we don't know.
Is Puck going after Martinez? That is a little bit weird.
Yeah, Puck is going. Let's see.
It's also 5 mile an hour difference on their fastballs.
I mean, Justin Martinez throws really, really hard. AJ Puck, early pick 264, late 374. ADP is like 313 the last 3 days. So yeah, he goes later pretty consistently. Martinez is interesting. I've got him a few different places. I could see him taking the job and running with it. I am worried about at least a share, though, because I think Puck is very, very good. Kenley Jansen, does he sign somewhere? Does he sign with Texas? Does he sign with Washington or Detroit? Or Miami probably wouldn't spend the money that way.
Some of those places are out of money. I mean, Texas is acting like they're up against a hard cap, internally or whatever. I'm looking near the bottom here, and I don't see a lot of teams that have money that would sign him, at the very bottom. And the bottom bullpens are the White Sox, Rockies, Nationals, Reds, Marlins, Angels. I haven't said one that I think will spend money. Oakland.
The Reds could, like, in theory.
Yeah, the Reds.
Because they signed Hayes after being interested in Luis Robert, and Hayes was only $5 million. So if Jansen only costs like $10 million, they could probably pull that off.
I think the Tigers are a risk because they've got a collection that they can use pretty well, but having, a sort of closer with a capital C on his hat might suit them. I think the Tigers are a risk. I think who else could be a risk? The Rangers, even though, I don't think they have much money. I think there's also some question about his health and how he ended the season health-wise. And then there's not, I think, a lot of open seats waiting for him. I mean, if the Tigers or the Rangers sign him, he's a closer. If anybody else signs him, he's a setup guy. Would he do that?
Yeah, I don't know if at this stage of his career, if just continuing to pitch even in a non-closer role is something that Kenley Jansen wants to do. He was 27 saves again last year. Injuries, I mean, it was a back injury, it was a lat injury, it was shoulder inflammation at the end of the year, so it was a lot of stuff that was piling up on him. But I think the two places he could go that would be good for him to get another shot at 25 saves are the Nats and the Tigers. Good enough teams, easy to see how they could manipulate the rest of the bullpen to just make him the guy. And if they get to the point in August where they don't like what they see, they're either trading for something else or they're willing to make a move as they know their potential postseason fate. Once they get to that stage, they'd be more willing to pull him out of the role if it wasn't working.
Looking ahead, what we're doing after this is a little bit more just talking about pens. So why don't I just let's throw the Tigers thing up here that I have. What I've done here is I've adjusted the Stuff Plus for Beau Brieske and Casey Mize. And what I did for Casey Mize was I gave him 5 points of Stuff Plus from his regular number to make him a reliever. So his ERA projection is irrelevant according to that Stuff Plus number that I have there. And so is Beau Brieske's. And what I did with Beau Brieske was I used his second half Stuff Plus because he was pitching in shorter outings and was more of a reliever. And I think we saw that in the postseason. And in fact, if Beau Brieske is going to give me one inning at a time, and I think they have built enough depth in the rotation that, the Casey Mize idea was yours. I'm going to give you the credit on that. That was part of the Robert Suarez group chat. Casey Mize discussion was, what about Mize to closer? But I think if there is a guy here that isn't listed necessarily as a closer on the step chart that could be the closer from day one, it's Beau Brieske. And so I like Beau Brieske late. I don't really like Foley because he's a sinker thrower. So no matter the fact that he has one of the better projections on here, you can see it's a poor strikeout rate. It's not necessarily a Ben Joyce level. You can see that from the Stuff Plus. And sinkers, make you susceptible to platoon splits, which is why Tyler Holton has taken saves from Jason Foley in the past. But Beau Brieske, I think, has the overall arsenal to become just a closer against righties and lefties. I like him the best as it stands now. But I do think if you put Kenley Jansen on top of this, it's actually probably better for everybody. Jansen can just be the closer, and he won't be necessarily the maybe true talent best pitcher in the pen, but nobody will have, sort of look at these ERA projections. They're not great. Yeah. Nobody on here is making you embarrassed that you have Jansen out there and, it so obviously should be Brieske. So I think right now I like Brieske, but if they sign Jansen, then that's the best case scenario. But what you're doing if you take Jansen here is you're sort of assuming that there's like this one place he could go that works out for him, or two. I mean, he'd probably close in Texas too.
I guess let's make it 3 because I think he'd close for the Nats, right? I mean,
he'd close for the Nats. That seems like a weird. That would, yeah. I mean, yeah, it would be a job.
They might not even have a full bullpen yet. Derek Law, Jorge Lopez, Jose Ferrer, Evan Reifert. Eduardo Cella.
I'm not really drafting anybody out of that pen right now.
No, that looks like a really clear landing spot. Now we know where Ryan Presley's going, right? We had that trade to the Cubs, too, so he's the last in tier 4, probably with the up arrow next to his name. But you've talked about the other guys you like, Pearson, Porter Hodge. Like, how many saves does Ryan Presley get this year? And are the ratios going to come in more like 2023? I guess we're talking about the whip, really, or more like 2024.
I think Presley starts the season as a closer. I still don't think he ends the season as a closer. If he does, do what he did last year, I just think that would lead to a blown save eventually. I mean, a 3.49 ERA and a 1.34 whip doesn't sound that bad, but it's a 23.8% strikeout rate. It just seems like that will lead to a blown save or two, and that'll lead to questions if Hodge and Pearson are shoving. So there's pretty good options. He's at 36 at this point. The velo's down to 93.9. So there's a lot of different ways that this can lead to him coming out. Maybe they start the season with him. I think I've seen this with different teams that they start the season with a certain bullpen, and they may even internally have people circled that they're like, this will probably be our October closer. If you think about it, how different some of those pens were from even what was happening in August and September in the playoffs. Am I crazy?
No, it happens. And we've seen it even with kind of the legacy closers, I guess we'll call them. We've seen Jansen wobble in second halves. We've seen Craig Kimbrell become less important over time. Yeah. It just sort of changes over time for that group. Looking beyond pick 250 at the unsettled situations, let's say the Rangers don't sign Kenley Jansen. What's the plan for you there? Is that a bullpen you're targeting?
I don't really like Chris Martin as a closer. I know that I showed that my bias towards fastball stuff over other stuff was maybe incorrect, but you're talking a 38-year-old who throws 94.9 is projected to strike out 24 to 25% of the guys he sees. I just don't, I don't think that he's my closer. I could pick other pretty easly. Maybe taking Robert Garcia late. This might be one where I just kind of avoid it. I'm not that excited about it. But Robert Garcia has a better ERA projection, a better strikeout rate projection, a better fastball. It's not like either of them is like a super incumbent closer that's done it a bunch of times. So I guess I like Robert Garcia at price over Chris Martin at price.
Yeah, I haven't been drafting Martin. I do have a little bit of late Robert Garcia in draft and holds, at least so far, so I see the case for taking a shot there. I mentioned the Nats before. I don't see anybody in that bullpen that I'm drafting at the moment. That looks like an easy avoid. Maybe the answer is via trade or somebody falling out of the starting rotation mix, ending up in the bullpen. I think we might get a surprise.
You were going to say falling out of the sky.
That'd be even more bizarre than just shifting out of a starting role. And even that, I'm like, yeah, who would it be out of the starters? They have 6 starters in the depth chart right now. You're
like
gonna
Jake Irvin.
You'd turn Soroka into a closer. That'd be kind of
that could
odd.
happen.
Maybe it's something like that. It just it doesn't seem obvious.
Soroka's an interesting, really late draft and hold guy because you're like, hey, maybe he's in the rotation, or maybe if he's in the pen, that might be actually better because he's like got a path to saves.
He was a lot better as a reliever. 60 Ks and 36 innings as a reliever last year, sub-3 ERA with the White Sox. So maybe I stumbled into one there that could actually be a solution.
History, just put him in the pen.
That'd be a fun second act if he went to the bullpen, stayed there for 3-5 years, ended up racking up like 100 saves. That'd be a good story. Turned out that way. Are you doing anything with the Marlins, the White Sox, or the Rockies?
I think the Marlins actually have a pretty good pen, and I've taken different shots at it, big super late in draft and holds, and I'm not, and like only leagues. But, I think Calvin Fauché is probably the closer right now, and he has a 96 mile an hour fastball, good stuff plus, a mediocre projection, 3.87 ERA. I mean, we are talking about the Marlins. They are kind of rebuilding. Jesus Tinoco has a better ERA projection by Oopsie. Has a slightly better fastball. And at least right now, this is sort of a bump from where he used to be. He's kind of a veteran himself at 29. But Tinoco has been one of my favorite late draft and hold guys because I think even if Fauché is the closer, they're going to give Tinoco shots. Because this is going to be the type of pen where they are totally cool with developing these guys, to sell them in season, and even Anthony Bender, I think, could get a couple saves in him. I don't think that these are the kind of guys that they feel like they need to keep around. This is a deep rebuild. This isn't like we're going to be good next year, I don't think. So in a deep rebuild, you trade away closers even if you have 3 years of control on them because they get more back. So I kind of think, there might be 10 saves each for Bender, Fauché, and Tinoco, which in a draft and hold only league situation, like that's fine. Looking at it now, Bender has the best ERA projection, probably the best overall projection, but Tinoco's been one of the cheapest, so I've been taking some Tinoco.
And thinking about the White Sox and Rockies, I mean, Prelander Baroa got some hype last year. I don't know, man. Like I don't really. That team's so bad.
I just don't think they have the talent. Like the Marlins have some talent in the bullpen, right? Like people to get excited about. I just don't. Maybe Baroa, but I'm not that excited about the talent in the White Sox bullpen.
I haven't been doing it. I've not been throwing darts in that group at all. And then Colorado, I just always avoided.
Leisure had some good stuff, but
I just couldn't turn it into consistency last year.
Hurt and bad results, yeah. So it's kind of hard to bet on him. And then the Rockies are just like, the park is going to make it terrible. Do you want to buy a Rockies closer to try and pitch him away from home? That's going to be really hard. How many weeks do you think the Rockies won't be home next year at all?
Probably doesn't come up that often, right? Probably.
I've seen Halverson. Halverson go.
Yeah, I see him get drafted a lot.
He throws 100, and it's decent stuff, but the park effects make his projection a 4.34 ERA.
Do you feel like the ceiling on a guy like that is what we don't love about Alexis Dìaz? Like you get these ratios, you get the 25 saves, but the ratios aren't good and the K rate's kind of light. Like that's, I guess if that moves the needle for you in a really deep league, then that's what you would take the chance on. It'd be Seth Helverson.
Remember when I said that Alexis Dìaz was a 77th reliever, that means there's a lot of guys that don't get any saves that are better than him.
Yeah. Yeah, and we are focused heavily on save-specific leagues, but we'll try to talk about some saves and hold leagues at some point. I know Eno's got a hard out today, so we got to make sure we stay on schedule. So if you got questions for a future episode, it can be reliever-centric. It can be anything you want. Join the Discord, use the mailbag channel, send those questions in. We'll try to answer some of those later this week.
Well, yeah, we're due for a big mailbag thing at some point, so this is also a great time at the end of the positional stuff, just players that we didn't mention somehow. It seems like we've mentioned every player ever.
But we didn't.
But I'm sure there's players we didn't mention. And then also, we've been trying to pepper this with some best ball and draft and hold and only league, so if there is a specific type of league that got left behind, I know very little auction. If there's a question that, the kind of sort of broader the question is almost, the better it is for the mailbag, because if it's like very specifically keep, 2 out of these 5, like we want to answer questions that we can kind of, that can help other people as well.
Right. And we could answer the other questions in the Discord too. So just because it doesn't make it in the show doesn't mean we won't answer it, but yeah.
Go to the Would You Rather section.
Yeah, if you got player toss-ups, the Would You Rather channel is the place to go.
I used that in my last draft.
You used it? You crowdsourced it?
Casey Mize versus Andrew Abbott, baby.
You took Abbott, didn't you?
No, I took Mize.
Oh.
I ended up just being like, hey, why do we create models if we don't believe in them? So.
Because of Lodem.
Exactly.
We are going to go on our way out the door. You can find Eno on Blue Sky, enoceras.bsky.social. I'm dvr.bsky.social. Thanks to Brian Smith for putting this episode together. That's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We're back with you on Wednesday.
Thanks for listening.